what I was seeing in practice was that you know, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Like, we could put in place all of the worm-wise principles, and there was some good research showed that reversion was possible if we did all these good management practices. And it was one of those like few times where I guess it's a win-win. So if we changed all these practices, we often actually had more profitable farms. So by, you know, putting in crops or changing your beef and sheep ratio and all these kind of things, they actually did better. So it was one of the only times it was a win-win. So, and we were getting wins, and I think all of you will have good stories from around the country of getting those wins. But what I was really struggling with, especially as a dairy vet dabbling in the realms of sheep and beef, was that we had these really good strategies across the industry. So EMED, essentially, like avoidance, integration, and refugia. Monitoring and effective drenching, I think we had a good handle on. So we were doing a lot of fecal E counts, and we were kind of doing a lot of that. That was our contact point with many of our farmers. So I've got a 500 egg per gram egg count. Should I drench or not? And so we're really kind of trapped at that bottom end. And when we started to talk about the avoidance stuff, it was kind of easy at the extreme. So we could do things like give the crops, you know, crops, for example, were a really good tool. And if we put crops, took them right out and really avoided it, that was great. But on the fringes, it's a bit more tricky. And same with refugia. You know, not drenching your ewes was a really easy decision, but what do I do with my lambs and all that kind of stuff? So
I'm back.
Oh, good. Take over.
So do you want to go on to the next slide? Yeah, there we go. So we have two, obviously, like Ryan was saying, two main things that we are trying to make a bit easier for farmers to utilize and visualize. The first one is larval avoidance. Hopefully, most of you guys recognize this graph. But basically, it shows that no matter if you drench animals after they've been exposed to larvae, they will never make up for that growth check that they have. So if you look at this graph, at the bottom there, the triangles, you've got 5,000 larvae a day introduced to those animals, and the crosses above is exactly the same, except that they were drenched at day 21. So they never make up that growth check, although they're doing better than the triangles, which, you know, went without the drench. They're still never going to make up that difference up to the 1,000 larvae a day group or the control group, which had none. So it's great that we have drenches and everything, but even if there was no problem with drenches and we could use them forever without issue, we would still want to be avoiding larvae in order to maximize the growth potential of these animals. So either way, this is a good thing to do. Next one, please, Ryan. Oh yeah, this is the same thing. Basically, it's just without the drenches, it's just different amounts of larvae. It just makes it even more clear that, you know, the more larvae they're exposed to, the worse their growth rate is, essentially.
Yeah, and a big shout. Charlotte presented this at a thing I was with 5 days ago, and I really liked it because often we think all or nothing with these things, like crops or nothing, but the fact that when she reanalyzed the data, the 3,000 larvae were still better than the 5,000. You know, anything that we do is kind of helping.
So then obviously the other thing we're talking about is refugia. I was surprised actually at field days by how many farmers were still confused about this. I think that it is still a difficult subject for people to pick up and entirely understand. And I think part of that is because it's not something you can see, it's just a concept that's floating around that people say this word refugia. And yeah, there's nothing really that you can use as a tool to identify how refugia is helping you. So it's also really important to understand with refugia that 90% of the worm population is actually outside the animal. So even if we are practicing refugia well, we have to consider that the paddocks that we're putting those animals on to pick up the clean larvae are the larvae that they're picking up actually clean? Or are they just being put back onto a paddock that has previously been exposed to potentially resistant worms, and therefore picking up more resistant worms to take on to the next paddock? Next one, please. So that's basically the point at which I think Ryan decided that he couldn't continue down this road of looking at sheep without any way to utilize data to create something that was more helpful than drawing this map, which is what he ended up doing with that particular farm that he was working with. Beautifully color coded, but unfortunately this is not something that we can do on a daily basis. We can't spend our days drawing maps every time a mob moves, every time the weather changes, every time we do a drench. It's just not practical to map out all those changes on a piece of paper. Nobody's got the time or the brain space. And those things are all bits of data that we have access to. So when we're thinking about what causes larval emergence, we know that weather conditions, temperature, humidity all have a part to play. And we also know that we can access that information. You know, we have satellites tracking that kind of thing all the time. So it is technology that we can use. When you put that together with the information that the farmer has, for example, you know, what stock classes have been in there, what drench they've been exposed to and when, that's all stuff that we can put together to form a really good picture of what's happening on a farm and where that larva is and where the resistance is and what your risks are. So when we consider all of that, next slide, please. We can put all those things together and create DAGI, which is an app. And it basically takes all that information and gives it back to you in a really easy to understand presentation. Yeah. So basically you're given back these kind of traffic light systems, which show you, obviously, red is bad, green is good. So it gives you the options and it shows you what your paddocks and also your mobs are looking like in terms of their risk. Can you go on to the next one, please, Ryan? The input requirements are pretty low on a daily basis. We knew that farmers are not going to want to spend all day in front of a computer putting in loads of bits of data. They have enough to do, and frankly they already do that with some of their farm management tech, so they're not going to want to do the same thing over and over again. So when Ryan was creating the app, he basically made as much of it as possible automatic and fitted into the model at the background. So the only thing that you as a farmer, not you guys but your farmers, will need to put in is when you move mobs into different paddocks, pre-grazing pasture quality and height, and when it's available, drench dates and dosages, fecal egg counts, and when you put a paddock into crop. DAGI then pulls in all the weather data, the animal feed demands, which is part of an algorithm in the background, and the worm life cycle pattern, which is also in the background. Just a note on the farm management software, it's not currently integrated with that, but we are in discussion to make that happen. That's one of the big things that farmers have requested, and we agree that is something that would be really helpful because, yeah, then they're not doing things twice. Okay. Okay, so let's look at a bit more detail at this traffic light system. So on the left-hand side, regardless of whether you're looking at mobs or paddocks, you have the larval challenge in the sheep, in the paddocks, or the worm burden in the sheep. That kind of covers the avoidance area that we were talking about in AirMed earlier. And then on the other side, we have refugia, which is demonstrated in resistance risk, which is proportion of drench exposed larvae or worms. So all of that data is fed through the back of the app, and you come up with this traffic light system, and you can then do things like compare. For example, this screen is showing you a mob that you're trying to move to a new paddock. you're trying to pick which paddock is going to be most beneficial to these tutus. And when you look down at the paddocks, you know, it immediately becomes obvious that you probably don't want to put them in lakeside because they've got a really high resistance risk and a moderate larval challenge. Valley Road is a really nice clean paddock, so you're probably wanting to save that for like your youngest mobs. And then, you know, well, actually, we'll move on to that in a minute. Next slide, please, Ryan. When a farm is first added to DAGI, it starts in a yellow neutral state. So as you input the data, it starts to recognize the history and understand what you're moving where. And it tracks all the mobs, and it tracks the drench that is exposed to all those animals, and it also tracks the worms and the resistance level of the worms as they're moving across the farm through the animals. So all of that is in the background running constantly, and the more data you put in, the more accurate it's going to be because it has more information to track. So the history becomes more and more, you know, nuanced. Next slide, please. So again, this is the heat map system or the traffic light system. It's important to note that the larval challenge or the worm burden is ranked within the farm. So there would be absolutely no point in us comparing the paddocks in this farm to the paddocks in another farm, or, you know, even another area of the country. They only have the paddocks that are available to them. So there's no point doing a comparison across farms. What we're trying to show is the best decision that you can make based on the information that you have. So there will always be some red paddocks and there will always be some green paddocks. Basically, you know, it's being compared against each other. And also, like, when you get to things like these high challenge paddocks, you can use, as I said at the bottom, that cattle or older stock to help bring that colour back down to green. There is ways within the app that you can bring that colour back. Next, Ryan, please. So yeah, this is discussing the resistance risk. Again, traffic light system on the other side. So if you're looking at it, the right-hand side, sorry, of the app, and regardless of whether that's mobs or paddocks, it will always be down that side. The idea with this bit is that you're allowing farmers to visualize that refugia. So hopefully that will help them to kind of track, you know, how that refugia is helping them. Because you do have the ability to, when you drench a mob, leave part of that mob undrenched. And again, that history cycles through the whole app. Next one, please. So this is probably my favorite part of the whole app. This is the history tab. It's very clever because it allows you to look back at choices that have been made and how they have impacted the mob or the paddock that you're looking at. So in this case, you're looking at the history of the feedlot herd at the top. The area that's outlined in blue, that is pinned to the top of the screen. And the rest of it, the paddock history below, you can scroll through. And as you scroll, the colour of the feedlot herd at the top will change according to at what point it was a different colour in the history that you're looking at. So if you scroll back down to Lakeside, you would probably find that it wasn't quite as red. It was maybe an orange or a yellow on the left-hand side on the worm burden. And if you scroll through that, it would change in colour. So you can literally track it through all the way back to when you first start with the history of that paddock or that mob. And you can do it for both mobs and paddocks. So, you know, if you're looking at a mob, you can see the history of the paddocks. And if you're looking at the paddocks, you can see the history of the mobs that have been through that paddock. So I think that's really helpful because it allows farmers to say, oh, that decision was really good, that worked really well, and that decision was not, let's not do that again. So they can see the benefit of taking certain actions. Okey-doke. So just a few other aspects of the app. As I said earlier, you can use cattle to clean up or mop up a paddock. If you put a mob of cattle in your farm, it does not give you the predictions like it does for sheep. They're not technically, if you want to put it like this, they're not technically animals in this model. they are literally just being used as a tool to mop up the paddocks, but they're not classed like the sheep are. We're not monitoring or tracking them. Next one, please.
And just the key, just one extra point there is that because we're not doing any tracking, you have to put entry and exit covers there, whereas you only have to put entry covers for sheep.
Yeah. And the next kind of extra in the app is the barber's pole. So we haven't included Haemonchus in the general worm burden kind of below that you've got there, but we have included it as a separate thing entirely. So when the conditions are favourable for Haemonchus, you will get this pop-up that you can see at the top of the screen to highlight the fact that there's an increased risk at the current time. It's based on expected survival rate from eggs laid 22 days previously, given the conditions that they've been exposed to. And it will be in a kind of fire danger type setup, as you can see at the bottom there. It's not completely finished at the minute, it's just that banner, but it will be, it will look more like that. Next one, please. Obviously, when you put a fecal egg count in, it basically resets the mob contamination level. So the more fecal egg counts you put in, the more accurate the data is going to be. Yeah, it kind of keeps everything ticking over and makes sure that it's as accurate as it can possibly be. So we welcome as many fecal egg counts as people are willing to do. Drenching, like I said before, allows for partial mob drenching. The efficacies are set at 75% for most drenches, apart from the novels, which is 95%. But there is also the ability for you to override those if you've done reduction tests and you know that your figures are different to that. You can go in and update them. Next, please.
Yeah, and the key there, I think, is that we're trying to get it we're putting it at 75%, which hopefully for a lot of farms will be really low to drive that drench checks, because we know that makes such a huge critical difference in the background model.
You can also add a crop, so you can change your paddocks to crops. Importantly, we have asked when you do this, the farmer to put in a percentage of cultivatable land for that paddock, because there is always going to be some that isn't able to be put into crop, even if that's just around the border. And that, you know, we know that that grass can then present a really high worm burden because they'll preferentially go for it. So you could potentially have a real worm problem and a very small amount of grass that people overlook because they think, oh, it's crops, they'll be fine. So that's all built into the app as well. It takes that into consideration. Next. So this is just a little indication of how you navigate around the app. You've got paddocks on the top at the right-hand side, and you've got mobs on the left-hand side, and you can just flick between them. It gives you the larval or the worm burden risk below in order of which you need to be most worried about. And then underneath that, it does the same for resistance. So it's really clear, really easy to see which ones you need to be concerned about and thinking about doing something with. You've also got the handy page to the right there, struggling mobs. So because of the data that Ryan's going to take you through in a minute, the app can predict what mobs are going to be deficient or likely to be deficient in energy based on the information you've given it, how many animals are in the paddock, what the grazing is like currently. Like I say, Ryan will take you through that in a minute, but basically it allows you to have a look and see who needs moving and use the information that we've got in the app to make the decision about where it's going to be best for them to go. Okay. Yeah, mob management. So there's a few things that it will allow you to do, as it says here, supplementary feeding, set stocking, irrigation, etc. We know that there's going to be farm differences and we want to mitigate for them as much as possible. We've tried to think of most things. I'm sure there'll be feedback from farmers about things that we have not thought of, but that's all good. That's what we want. Okay. So in terms of limitations, this is what we really want to end up with, which is literally a heat map of each farm with the colours on the map, so you can really easily see what paddock is doing what. Currently, we don't have funding for that. Hopefully down the line it will happen. Like I said, we are also talking to the farm management companies, and most of them already have some kind of map, so there is a potential for integration there. So hopefully it won't be too far in the future.
Yeah, and discussions with Farm IQ are looking pretty good. That looks quite achievable. And then resolution is also on the table at the moment.
And mobile.
Oh yeah.
So basically, what is your role? We see DAGI as something that is not going to be used effectively if everybody isn't using it together. We know that vets are in a really, really fantastic position to work alongside farmers, because you're trained in the worm-wise principles, and you see a lot of other farms. You see what works and what doesn't. And you have the ability as trusted farm advisors to take that information and educate your clients on, this is a good idea, this isn't a good idea. We appreciate that taking new tech on board is probably not what any of you want to be doing much of the time. Everybody's busy. Most of us don't have time to sit down and go through tech and understand it. I'm certainly not very techy, so to me, if this was brought to me in practice, I would have been like, oh God, another thing I need to learn. But we promise you, it's really, really easy to use. It's very intuitively laid out, and it's not something that you need to take the technology away or take any information away and look at it and go through it. It's literally presented to you, ready for you to use. So what we're hoping is that it's going to enable vets to have like a talking point for farmers, because you'll literally be able to see the information in front of you and go through it with them. When it's rolled out properly, like 100% finished, there will be a way for vets to log on to their farms and see the information, and then you can work through it with them, even if you're not with the farmer. Currently, that's not where we're at, but we will be. We also are asking every farmer that signs up to give us a named vet that they're going to be working with. So we wanted to give you guys a heads up before we spoke to the farmers, because there's nothing worse than clients coming to you and asking you about something that you haven't heard of yet. We really are asking the farmers that sign up to sit down with their vets between 2 and 3 times a year. Might make sure that it is 3 times a year, and be willing to pay you for that time to go through DAGI, to look at what they've done so far, to look at what they are going to do in the future, to make a worm plan, basically. And so one of the things we're asking you guys is to help us with the beta launch to find the 150 maximum farms that we're going to roll it out to start with. We'll be doing 50 farms at a time. We really need those farmers to be people who are interested and who are well driven to do fecal egg counts or are already doing fecal egg counts. People that will be keen to feed back, and people that are keen for a discount, because they'll be getting it for £600 for a year, $600, sorry, for a year. But that will be from the point that we're 100% happy with the app, so it'll probably be more like 18 months. When it's fully 100% rolled out, it will be $1,000 per farm per year. So this is good saving and a good way to kind of get introduced to it, and also have some the ability to feed back and shape the app. We want it to be something that is easy to use and that farmers enjoy using. So if anybody springs to mind, please get in touch and let us know. But yeah, crucially, we really want to help you guys use it to the best of your ability. So we are making a whole host of bits and pieces that are going to help you do that, from presentations that you can give yourself, to social media tiles, to newsletters, anything that you want to, you want us to create, we basically will. So please just ask us if there's anything you think of that would be helpful to have. Cool. Oh yeah, and huge thanks to sheep and beef cattle vets who have been very helpful, and Beef and Lamb New Zealand as well. We really, really appreciate Ginny and everybody else's support from Wormwise.
And some funding.
And the funding as well, yeah, we really appreciate that.
Right. Any burning questions on the basic setup before we go deep dive into the model? See, there's a few which are kind of more in-depth model ones at the moment. So no raised hands. Right, we'll crack in. So next part, basically, I'll take you through the background model, what's sitting in the background, some of the underlying decisions we've made, and most of these have been road tested by a group that we got together in February, including who's on here, Clive, and a few other people from around the country. Yeah, hopefully this will. So first of all, in the background, in terms of the dynamics of the worm life cycle and its interaction with weather and temperature and everything, and host dynamics, we've used a model out of the University of New England called Turned Worm. So it was developed by a very clever cookie called Jan Lawrenson. Now, Jan, he basically combined 7 of the best models from around the world and condensed them into one cool little model. And it's open source, and we've got the use of it with their blessing. So it's a really cool model, but it was built for research, not farmer friendly, not scalable, and a few other things. So we've got that in the background. And the second major model that we've used is QGraze. So some of you might have used, especially older members might have, because it was an ag research and meat board project back in the day. And it's a model which predicts grazing behavior, which I'll talk about a little bit in the next few slides. Right, so I'll start with basically go through the life cycle of that eating and worm thing, and just talk about each step, what's underlying it. So the first one is that mob setup. So you basically set up a mob. You'll put in joining dates for each of the mobs if they're mating or getting pregnant, and then the average age of all those classes of stock will come from those joining dates. And then
the food.
and then we've got one
My
second.
favourite movie is
We find it.
What We Do in the Shadows.
Classic Diana. So live weight is the big determinant. So you have to put the live weight, but mature live weight of that mob, and that drives everything. So from there we calculate energy demand, the age, the live weight, growth, everything. So we don't have a nuanced one, so you can't say I'm growing faster than the other. But if you've got, say, terminal size, then just make a bigger mature live weight, and that should cater for that. Also in the background, we're putting scanning percentages, and they can be updated by mob as you split them, and that drives a heap of the pregnancy demand energy, which is going into the calculations. So then you've got basically got a mob and a paddock. We then have the farmer input an entry cover, and then the second thing is I've got low, moderate, or high quality. Now those low, moderate, or high, I basically explain it to farmers as low is kind of brown top, moderate is normal, and high is something you'd finish lambs on. And in the background, what's happening is I sat down with Tom Fraser, who's kind of like the guru of QGraze, and we've put together figures for every month of the year that correlate with those low, moderate, or high. And the way QGraze works is it basically assigns the pasture to legume percentage, so percentage of clover, dead matter percentage, leaf, and then of the rest of the green matter, is it leafy or stemmy? And so basically from there, it's got a really cool model where it says given that bite size, there'll be preferential eating of legumes first and then other things. So your average quality doesn't go down in a linear line over, say if they're in a paddock for 3 or 5 days. What's actually happening is it's a higher quality on day 1, lower on day 2, 3, and so on. And it will adjust your total grazing allocation. And so from there, we can do 2 things. Oh, sorry, this is a kind of picture. So there's some calibrations sheets and stuff. Farmers won't need to do this because we're just making assumptions. That's the model if you really want to get highly involved. So then from that model, we're able to do a few things. So we've got the entry cover, we're able to estimate the exit cover. And the reason we decided to automate that rather than get farmer input is I know coming from the dairy world that exit covers are probably the most poorly reported or measured event. And so I think everyone's going to do a default exit cover anyway, so we may as well take that guesswork out of the equation and estimate it with the QGraze model. So the second thing it gives us is estimated ME intake, and we're going to use that as a proxy for protein intake. So you'll see later that basically all immune function is linked to protein intake rather than energy and a whole lot of other things. We can't get access to protein of these or estimate it, so what we're doing is a proxy and to say in New Zealand situations, on the whole, if you feed enough ME, you're going to feed enough protein. And then the final thing it gives us is fecal volume, which helps us work out the fecal E count, obviously, plus the fecal moisture estimate, which is really critical. You'll see all those temperature, humidity, water, moisture are all real key parts of how that worm cycle works. So then we've got an estimate of entry and exit cover. And from there, we are estimating what proportion of the larvae have been eaten within that paddock. Now, this is where we get slightly political. So you'll have all seen the picture on the left out of the Lincoln College Handbook in 1982, where we look at this basically a heap of those larvae being in the very bottom of the sward below the 5 centimetre mark, or in the last couple of centimetres. What this model is doing is there's a couple of more recent bits of research. One from John Neeson, who looked at basically the larval, did lots of larval counts on a whole heap of different pasture types. And basically his finding was that on average, your larval numbers matched your herbage density. So yes, there are definitely more larvae at the bottom of the sward, but it's also more dense. And so that's backed up by another couple of papers. And in essence, the outcome from that is if you eat 50% of the available dry matter, then you will eat 50% of the larvae that are sitting in that paddock. That's how the model works. We're definitely not keen to explain this to not change the messaging to the industry, because if we go back, avoiding grazing the bottom of the sward is so critical for so many other factors, like the amount of energy they consume, the fact that they're not, they will consume way more larvae. So we don't want to confuse the messaging, but just so you know, in the background, that's how the model works. And obviously all those entry covers driven off the sward stick. So the sheep have now eaten those worms, and then eaten those L3 larvae, sorry. And that L3 maturation inside the host is linked to quite a few things. But firstly, the exposure, so how many larvae they've actually had. If they haven't had much exposure, they won't have immune recognition yet. The protein intake, so that's the key driver of immune function in the models, which is, as we said, estimated by the ME intake. The density of the worm populations and the age of the worm populations, plus the age of the actual animal as a percentage of mature weight. So that controls every step. So they come in as larvae and eventually become adults, and those adults over time will become more fecund or less fecund. And yeah, there's a very fancy, cool model, which yeah, I won't go into any more detail about. And then from there, we estimate a fecal egg count output. So a couple of things. So we've got that worm population in the animals. When you drench, we can obviously split into mobs, but what's happening is anything that survives that drench, we kind of classify as red. So drench exposed or red, and they will get tracked through the whole life cycle from there. So because of that, updating your drench efficacy tables are really critical, because obviously if you've got, you know, a mob of 1,000 lambs putting out 400 eggs per gram and you've got a 75% efficacious drench, they will continue to put out 100 red eggs every day, or no, per gram. So a lot of red eggs. So it will drive you to really promote doing drench efficacy testing or drench checks with these clients. So what is then happening is those fecal egg counts are being put out, and some of them are green eggs because they haven't been exposed to drench. Some of them are red eggs because they have been exposed and probably survived a drench. So they're probably, you know, the risk of them having drench resistant genetics is very high. When they hit the ground, we then speciate them. So we took a data set from Beef and Lamb's nationwide collection survey, which some of you would have been part of. And basically that's got a split between Teledysargia and the trikes. So those are the two groups that we were actually modeling. And so if you were, say, in June, we would assume that 95% of those eggs that are released are going to be Teledysargia, and 10% of those and 90% of them are going to be trikes, and so on. And yeah, the reason we settled on those two, one is Homunculus becomes really tricky because of its fecundity, and also we didn't want to get into a position where we're estimating or telling people not to drench because we think it's low and you've got Homunculus going on. So that's why we made the risk alert for Homunculus, so people can kind of stratify and think about it, which I'll talk about in a second. So then they're in the environment as as eggs, and they're as red and green, and we will track those through that whole life cycle from there, and they'll retain that classification that'll be kind of tagged for them. And that'll apply to all steps of the free life living cycle. And so if you only drench 75% of a mob and leave 25% undrenched, then essentially what's happening is we're splitting that mob into two, and that undrenched mob continues to put out eggs at its previous classification, and the drenched mob puts out only red worms of another classification. So for example, you'll end up having drenched mob and a refusion mob in there, and they can each be putting out different amounts of green and red eggs onto that pasture, and that they just pull as a total number at the paddock level. So obviously, as Grace talked about, having that fecal egg count updates and driving them is really critical. And basically everything that we talked about in terms of the worm model before, there's a back calculation to say, given those factors are present, if I have a fecal egg count of, say, 300 eggs per gram, but my model is predicting 600, how many worms would make that model work? So it resets all of the internal parasite numbers, so the ongoing contamination of your paddocks drops or increases if it's the other way. So then we've got an egg in the feces, and we're now going to track it through 5 life cycle steps. So we're going to go egg into the pre-infective larvae, into infective larvae in the feces, which is basically your L3 in the feces. those L3 are going to go into the soil and then into the herbage. And each step of that way has a survival and a maturation step. So the survival step is kind of affected by weather and moisture and everything, but the maturation step is also, so in good conditions, you'll get, say, effective larvae in the soil going to the next step of maturation, becoming larvae in the herbage, and so they'll transfer from that bucket up to that bucket. And so the weather conditions with Met Service, the water content of the feces, air and soil, and the species involved will be the key determinants of that, including pasture height and a whole lot of other things. But the key outcome is then we can estimate on any day that number 5, so the number of infective larvae on the herbage, which will drive those heat maps when we're talking about the contamination levels. So then we've got automation of the Met Service data, and just really for your awareness, what we're using is a 4-kilometre virtual grid that they produce. So we hack on to the closest one given their address. So I might just jump into and asked a question in the chat for multiple farms. Would it make sense for them to have different accounts, or if it? I think the way I would think about it is if you're geographically very close and this 4-kilometre Met Service grid is going to be a pretty good estimation, it probably doesn't matter if you want to keep them all under one account, because at the moment we don't have a map system, so it's all just tables. So as long as they know where they want to move it, it's probably more of, you can't move them into the paddock on farm 2 because it's virtually impossible. It probably might just make it on a day-to-day basis more tricky. But the real key to why it wouldn't work would be if your Met Service data was significantly different. Yeah, and so then we've got water contents are obviously really important, and the fecal water contents is driven by the diet that they're eating and the fecal volume estimations and digestibility and stuff. The soil water content is driven by this. So we've got, when you do your paddock setups, you can choose between 3 different types of soil. So you've got clay, which is kind of going to be your approximate for heavy, generic, which is generic loamy just for the middle of the ground, and then light sandy bases come down the bottom. So the impact of weather and stuff will be different in how quickly they dry out. And then the air water content will just come from 2 things. It will come from the atmospheric Met Service data, but also your average pasture heights from your entries into paddocks. And then just to quickly go through those other points. So crops, as Grace talked about, are really important. So what they do when you put a crop in, we're basically doing that as a reset point. So it basically clears it to 0, but we do leave a proportion of the larvae that are in the soil at that time that are left, and so they are still available. I think Jenny
to answer Ginny's question on crops. Does the app assign different levels of larval challenge risk to different crops? For example, a short-term brassica crop versus a standard lucerne that's been in place for 4 years.
So overall, yes. So basically, once you're a crop, say if you have 90, let's assume the best possible outcome. So we've got 100% of that paddock has been cropped. So we're fully cropped. We're basically down to 0 when we start. What we have in the model is there isn't actually enough research, which is a good opportunity to do more research, to show that many of these crops will dramatically stop the life cycle. So things like chicory definitely can maintain it. So most of them can maintain it, and there's some good data out there, or good anecdotal reports which show that, potentially things like a well-spaced crops where you reduce that travel of larvae out from the pats, or they've got higher herbage levels, are probably going to be, it's harder to maintain that life cycle. But in this model, if you contaminate that paddock and re-eat it, so if you're eating it over 4 years, it will show up in the model as a more contaminated paddock. So yeah, that is important to know. You can silage and stuff, so you can take silage off. If you do silage, we don't reset you to 0. We basically take you down to a very low height and leave the bottom percentage of larvae present. Irrigation can basically be assigned to individual paddocks, and all we do there is we assume you don't get as dry as we would have predicted, and therefore your hatching rates are usually higher and your survivals are higher. And then the integration with other stock is obviously cattle, deer, whatever you want to put in. They're just set up as a mob, and that entry and exit cover that we talked about is required. Now, set stocking is going to be the real fun one. So basically, you will split those mobs across different paddocks. And when you do that set stocking, one of the requirements will be that if they're obviously pregnant ewes, you will have a mob level estimate of, say my average scanning percentage is 170% of that mob. When you split that mob, obviously, often people do singles and twins and triplets, so it will re-ask you to allocate that scanning percentage if those have changed. We then assume that overall you are set stocking at a stocking rate where the intake is going to approximately match the growth rates. So essentially, if you set it 5 centimeters, we're going to assume that on average that's going to stay at a 5 centimeter level with a buffer of a 5 day. So we're going to assume over those 5 days, given what mob you've put in that paddock, they're going to reduce that cover, and after 5 days we reset back to your entry cover. Every week the farmer will then get prompted to say, do you want to change the entry cover? And we'll have a whole farm ability, or by paddock, but I don't think many farmers will want to do it by paddock, to say that actually it's been a really growthy season, let's increase that entry cover by 100, or it's been a terrible growthy season and let's reduce it by 100. And the other thing around set stocking is lambs are not included until they're split into their own mob. So the ewes with their increased lactational energy requirements are basically taking on the energy demands of those lambs. So until they're weaned off, we're just ignoring them, partly for convenience and partly because everyone agreed it probably wasn't going to matter. And then, yeah, the homunculus model is basically everything we talked about with how we're tracking the Teledysargia and the trikes. We're doing the same thing with homunculus, but we're imagining that we laid down, say, 100,000 eggs 22 days ago with your average farm conditions. What proportion of those would have survived at 22 days or be L3 on the herbage? With the idea that if you can control for the other species, you'll probably control overall for homunculus, but it gives you, gives you basically, if you're going into a high larval challenge paddock with a high homunculus risk, that's not a great thing, and so it gives people a pause to rethink. So, yeah, back at the beginning.
We just got
the model in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just go back to the last one. Are we adjusting for kikuyu grass in Northland from both a pasture growth and quality point of view and larval survival in sward mat?
Cool. So yes and no. So the first thing is, so we don't have a pasture growth prediction model. So what is happening when we talk about intake? We're saying you have to give us that entry cover, and therefore we will give you the exit cover based on quality. So we will account for kikuyu to a point with the fact that this isn't to be mean to kikuyu, but I imagine you're more likely to be moderate or low quality when you enter on kikuyu, although I do hear it is a dairy feed in Australia and is maybe more nutritious than I've got in my head. So if you've got more information on that, that'd be great. So if you've got higher sward matting, it doesn't. So the only thing we're using at the moment is the sward stick. So if the cue doesn't match the sward stick, it won't match it. But what you could do is use, say, a summer or winter or an autumn one on your sword stick, you know how it's got those multiple zones, where we're likely to have more thatch base, rather than using, say, a spring one which is set up for a non-cue grass.
And the last one is a very enthusiastic message from Crispin. Thanks, Crispin. Does body condition scoring the mobs make a difference in the model at all?
Not in the model. So definitely don't want to change that approach in the industry, because obviously it's really good. And the way I think about, because how do I put this? Protein is the only thing that's really highly linked to immune function and reducing fecal egg output and all that kind of stuff. And I think what body condition score gives you is a couple of things. It gives you an idea that those animals have been properly fed and had enough protein for a long period of time. And so I think therefore the contamination level on your farm is likely to be a lot lower. Those animals have probably been net reducing, and they're in better condition, they're ready and firing to go. So we definitely want to do that, and we definitely want to take those into account in terms of drenching decisions and everything. But no, there is nothing to show that by itself it makes a difference in the model.
Any more questions? I think we've got literally 10 minutes left, so if there's anything else anybody wants to chime in on, please feel free.
You can just put your hand up and ask it if you like to.
Or just unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Go, Clive.
Yeah, just where you're putting in obviously your fecal egg count results and your resistance results from a fecal egg count reduction test. How easy is it to access that information once it's in there? And in terms of, can you go back and have a look at it historically?
So when you put those fecal egg count changes in at the mob level, if you go into the history of that mob, you'll be able to see they'll come up with, you know, I've drenched that mob, here's the fecal egg count and stuff. At the moment, there wouldn't be an easy way to go back and see the your change to your resistance risk, or your drench efficacy, sorry. But step 2 of the project is to build end of year report, and so we'll probably be able to build it into that.
Well,
also, I think when you look at the history of a mob, it will tell you, like you know, when you're scrolling through, it will show you when there's been different things happen. So things like a fecal egg count will be, say you did a fecal egg count between Valley Road and Clover Patch here, it will say fecal egg count at that point. So between those two paddocks, it will say when it's been done.
Cool.
But you won't, like if you go on to the fecal egg count on here on that screen where you can input it, you can't see the history written down step by step in that bit. That makes sense. Anything else from anybody?
And while everyone's thinking, I would say this is designed to be really easy, because this is designed as someone who is mainly a dairy vet who was trying to do this in practice, thinking, what do I need to actually make this a scalable thing that I could actually easily do? Because when I was first getting involved with some of these farms, they'd be ringing almost daily trying to talk through some of these decision making. So it should be quite easy. Yeah, if you've got interested farmers, a question from Stephanie, yeah, point them our way to sign up to the email list. But if you've got farms that you think would be ideal for the beta users, so those beta users are kind of, we want them to be ones that are likely to continue to input data. They've got a really strong relationship with you as a vet, so they are going to be helped, or aided, and actually embrace it. Probably willing to change or do stuff off the back of it, and I guess understanding that we will potentially change parts of this model.
Sorry, there is one more question, but I'm just wanting to say, if you go on the website, scroll down to the bottom of the first page, that is where people can sign up, and you can sign up as a vet, as a farmer, or as a rural professional, and it means that you will go on the right email list to get invited to the right things. So that's probably the best place for farmers to sign up. But if you want to get in contact, then the best email address is info.dagi.nz@gmail.com. But all of that is on the website, and we also have an Instagram and a Facebook page where we try and keep it updated with where we are and what we're doing. So be awesome for people to follow those, and you can see what we're doing without having emails bombarding you constantly.
Question from Jason: are direct drilled crops treated differently to those where sward is being turned over? Not in the beta version. We have been umming and ahhing about whether we need to, but not at this stage. Mr. Ewan.
Hello. Just from a decision-making perspective, are we able to log into the farmer's DAGI, or if they just phone us up and say, look at Lakeside paddock, do you reckon we should shift the tooth there or something? Can we access that from a remote location?
Yeah, so we haven't got the final picture from our app builders what that will look like, but yes, that is a requirement for the beta launch, that you guys will have some sort of login access. And long term, the ideal one is it'll be a multi-access. So you'll have the app, you can toggle between different farms under your account, so you can quickly do them. Whether or not I can get that one into the beta launch, I'm not quite sure yet, but that's the intention. But you'll definitely have login.
Is that everything? Is anybody else?
Thank you.
Feel free to email us as well if something occurs to you later on. But thank you everybody for joining us and for persevering if you couldn't get on through the email link. And we hope this has been informative and helpful. And if you do have any questions or queries or any ideas about how we can make this as easy for vets as possible to actually utilize and be a helpful tool, then please let us know, because there's not really any point in building an app if nobody then is inclined to use it. So please get in contact if you have anything else.
Just looking through, Ginny had one other question. Can you change the paddock status manually when you start if you already have known hotspots? We looked at that as a high potential to allow you to kind of change those colors, but we decided in the end that the vagaries of making that decision, knowing what the model was, meant the risk of farmers likely getting it wrong or not putting enough data made the challenge that would pose to the onboarding process not worth it. But once the model is being run, if you believe a paddock is overinflated or underinflated, there is the ability to nudge it up or down. And I think we've got it set that it'll nudge it up, say 20% or down 20% from contamination levels where it is.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
We
guys.
will plan more vet sessions, so keep an eye out in your inbox and we'll send them out to you as and when.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, team.